Hello, people.
Hello.
Hey, friends. Just grabbing my
Hello.
coffee.
Nice. I wish I could drink one now. I mean, I could, but
You could.
then, yeah, I would have to have GraphQL meetings until 6 a.m. Otherwise,
Who needs sleep? Who needs sleep?
yeah, that works once or twice, but then, you know,
Eventually.
eventually gets you. Yeah, I have a petition to buy calendar.org because I always type graphql.calendar.org until I realize that most likely we don't own this domain. And then I know that I have to type calendar.graphql.org to actually access our calendar. So it would be much simpler if we could just buy calendar.org and prefix it,
I
subdomain.
was gonna say that's like seems like it would be a high value domain, but there's nothing there.
Ah, maybe it's one of the few ones you can still buy for 15 bucks.
Probably
No
not
one,
that.
no one has ever thought about it.
The service has been suspended by its owner. We don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound good for their owner, whoever that may be. All right, let's see. Are we close to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? We have 8 attendees listed in the agenda and 7 people here. Who are we missing? Oh, I think we're missing Michael.
Ding ding.
Oh, actually, that's funny. Martine, you're listed twice. Um, but also, Mark, you're not listed at all. So the math ends up working out, but we got to update the agenda file. Mark, I'm going to task you with both deleting one of the copies of Martine's name and also adding yourself. Oh, it's merging. All right, cool. You're way ahead of me.
I can.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. Um, oh, I see you in there now. Welcome, folks, to the July edition of the GraphQL Working Group meeting. Um, to kick things off, of course, we always agree to the membership agreement, participation, and contribution guidelines, code of conduct, which are all listed, linked in the above, in case anyone ever wants a reminder. And a quick reminder that we're recording this. It's going to get published on YouTube, and we usually do some summarization tools on it to help us take notes. Um, let's go around the room and put names to faces, and we'll do so in the order that it shows up in the attendee list in the agenda file. Trip just pasted in the chat in case you didn't have a link open already. I'm right there at the top. Hello, everybody. My name is Lee.
Hey folks, I'm Benji from GraphQL.
Hello, James from Airbnb.
Martin from Apollo.
Pascal from Chili Cream.
Michael from Chili Cream.
Matt from Meta.
Mark from Yelp.
Hello, friends. Okay. We have a pretty packed agenda today. Um, Before we get into that, though, I noticed seeing that we are going to do our spec freeze before next month's meeting. So, we mentioned this last month, that we should start to be taking anything that's in late phases and trying to make sure that they are well reviewed and merging. And we will use sometime this meeting to make sure that if we have any of those, we get them in, and also next meeting. Um, Ideally, we get that freeze done in August so that by the September or October, we are doing the cut. Very exciting. Another reminder, we have our grants program. There's a link in the agenda file if you're ever curious about the grants program and some of the open items we have there, but just making sure that that's got some awareness. Okay, let's review our agenda of all the things we want to talk through. We have best practices for writing robust applications. Sibling errors should not be added after propagation. Allowing empty selection sets and empty object types. Allowing interfaces with no fields, unions, or members. One of inhabitability. Schemas with deprecated elements removed must be valid. Deprecate include deprecated and schema include deprecated. Talking about the first release of the GraphQL over HTTP specification and OTel semantic conventions. That's a long list, but is there anything that y'all want to talk about that is not on this list? Or any edits we want to make to the agenda before we dive in?
Let's move Pascal's item way above some of mine. And
That seems
we
fair.
should probably hoist the one of as well.
Okay, we will do the order of best practices writing robust applications. Then we will do one of inhabitability. Then we will do OTel semantic conventions. And then we will do the long list of the Benji show, which you've been busy. I love this. This is awesome.
It's
Okay,
basically everything is empty now.
let's go. Let's empty everything out. Empty it all out. Stamp, stamp, stamp. Okay. Let's stay on our agenda. Okay, Martine, the floor is yours for best practices writing robust applications.
Thank you. Yes, so not too technical item to warm us up. I'm going to copy paste the link in chat here. This came up while reviewing Sarah's modification to the best practices and to schema governance, the schema governance pages. I realized we have nothing in the docs that talks about how to write apps that are robust to schema changes, in particular new enum values, new union types in unions, and new object implementing interfaces. And this is something that has come up in the past, actually, with teams I've been working for. Some of those teams, they stay stuck. Like they don't want to add a new enum value forever. Because 5 years ago, they had a Python client that crashed because it wasn't able to handle the unknown enum case. So it feels like we should provide guidance so that people are at least aware of this. Like there are good solutions to all these problems. Basically forcing every application to handle the unknown case, both for enum values and for unions. So this is a proposal to add a new section to the best practice, not new section, but new page to the best practice. It's about writing robust application, and I'm putting this here in the agenda, not so much for discussion because we have a lot to discuss already, but for awareness. If you get the time before next month to leave your reviews in there, it would be greatly appreciated, even if it's just a thumbs up. or anything really, this is very welcome. This is all I had.
Do you want to this? I was just sort of skimming through this first draft that you have now, which looks great. And I don't know if it's super cool, like if it hits every single base that we'd ever want to hit. Um, but it seems like a fantastic starting spot. Do we want to merge this and just have this live and then just sort of incrementally edit the page as we want to in the future?
This is incredibly highly non-controversial in
Yeah, that was my
it
thought.
needs to be, and also incredibly like, yes, this is exactly the kind of thing you will run into. So yeah, I'm much prefer getting it in quick and iterating from there.
Okay, I'm doing it. We're gonna merge this in, and then that doesn't negate what Martin just asked for. Please read it. Please give a review. If we spot anything we want to improve or add, we should just do that. But in general, I think, yeah, like if there's obviously if there's something that's controversial or we're not sure about the take, we should wait and get review. But anything that's like an obvious win, especially on a website for documentation material, we should err on the side of getting the content out. So, woo,
Yeah,
I love this
I've
one.
I've I've one thing that I need to change in there. It's we need an admonition for future added values because that's something everyone will run into when they use it at some point. So, oh, my switch case is complete now, and then you realize, oh no, it's all fake. It's all fake.
Yeah, that could be a nice way to mention that like some of the more sophisticated clients when they do code generation, they tend to like auto generate like a case that can never be reached so you can do that. Um, which is like a nice thing to have for exhaustiveness checking. But yep, let's go ahead and add that Pascal, and then we should just anyone's welcome to from the TSC is welcome to stamp it and get that merged. Um, Amazing. Thank you, Martine. Fantastic way to kick things off.
Thank you.
Um, James, do you want to grab one of inhabitability next?
Yeah. All right. So I'm here to talk about one of inhabitability. I've talked about this before. I just shared a link to a PR for the spec. The general outline of the issue is that one of the way that they're defined allow you to define a type that requires an infinite value. And this ends up running into some of the existing rules around recursive input types. And it's not really written in the spec, but I think the spec does have a property around inhabited input types. So it must be possible to create a finite value for all possible input types. So this PR is really an update to massage the wording of the spec and one of the algorithms of the spec to update the recursive rules or like the rules around recursive input objects to account for one-ofs, and to also include some counterexamples around what does an invalid one-of type graph look like. This is the PR. I think I'm following up on that because I think it's about ready in, from what I can tell, for like draft status or something else. Its current state is I think the spec, I think I resolved all but one thread. Benji, there's sort of like a invitation for a discussion about some nomenclature that I think was, I wasn't quite sure how to follow up on that. So this is like, I'll follow up in GitHub. And then also the GraphQL JS implementation is in place. So I think, from what I can tell, I think there hasn't been major objection. And so I'm kind of polling the room to figure out what is between here and stage 2 or 3. Matt?
The immediate thing that points out is it better for us to require like an alternative besides AA that, or to allow one of to be empty? Like an empty one of is valid? Is that something that we want to express where it's like it is one of this or nothing? And one of, but I would assume we do not want one of to express also one of or null.
You know, that's a good question. This issue was filed, I think, before some of the like existing campaign around like empty objects and all the sort of emptiness. Perhaps it requires revisiting. My gut reaction is that input types are a little bit different. In that you there's already existing rules about I think deprecated input object fields. And there's rules around input types must be inhabited, which is does not apply to output types. That's my gut feeling, but I think that is a fair question, and maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I have the same gut reaction that like we kind of already have a concept of that, which is null. And so I think it would get like trickier to build value parsers for these things if it was not one of, but like zero or one of, that seems probably wrong. So instead if it's like it's either null or it's this input value with one of the following fields. Because the other thing might be you might want to like, you have three fields, first, second, and third, and the third one is an empty object or something. Like maybe that's okay. Because then you can say it's clearly the third case and there's just like nothing to put there. Which is I guess one of the things that Benji's going to help us walk through later supporting. But that would be more clear rather than just like having nothing in it. I bumped this up to at least stage two because we've got GraphQL JS support in place fixing this issue, and the spec text looks quite good. So I think the only thing that is different between stage two and stage three here is just sort of like last fine-grained review, and I see Benji's already been through it a little bit. And so I think once we've got that wrapped up, then we're stage three and we'll ship it.
Uh, cool. All right. Well, I think that I think answers the questions I came to get answers for. But if there's other things that we should discuss on this topic.
I'll also just flag because I know that the spec freeze is coming up soon. Um, you don't necessarily need to take this to a working group meeting to get it from stage two to stage three, considering this is like very final phase. If either Benji or I gets to it in the near future and can like gut check and review and make sure there's no open questions left, we will mark it as stage three and we will merge it.
Great.
And I just wanted to raise my discussion point because I think it's fine as it is, but I wanted to raise it anyway. When I was reading the text for this, you'll see my comment on line 1815, but effectively it says if field type is not an input object type, and I was worried that some people might say, oh, a one of input object is not an input object type when they're reading the spec, and I didn't want that confusion there. I think it's okay because we say that a one of input type is a variant of an input object type. But I wasn't sure whether it might be worth adding the parenthesis, including variants, to make it more explicit. I'm personally leaning towards not adding it, but I did think it was worth like seeing if anyone else felt that there was ambiguity there.
It seems fair. I don't have a good suggestion on how to improve it necessarily. Do you, Benji? Just including this like the suggested change there.
Yeah, that was my only thought, really.
I don't have a strong opinion either way. I think James, I'll let you make the final call on whether you think it helps or hurts. Take it as a
Yeah, I mean,
suggestion.
I'm also I don't have a strong opinion, but I do think that there isn't existing language around variance in the spec. I
Yeah,
think
that's
it's
true.
pretty consistently like one of input objects or one of types. So I think it's like there is an answer that is in the spec, and it's not exactly maybe on this line, but I think I don't think it's I think it's relatively unambiguous is my gut feeling, but not a strong preference.
Yeah, I'm happy to close it, but let's leave it open for a little bit to see if anyone else wants to read over it and give comments, but I'm happy to leave it as is.
Cool.
Okay,
Yeah, me too. Nice work on this.
thanks. All right.
Awesome. Pascal, we'll let you give us the latest on Hotel.
Yeah, so I've went through all of the comments. Thanks for the people which have left them. I believe Mark, you had some suggestions. They were, I think you suggested a metric that's added now as well. I went through the changes, and there was also a few people from Apollo that commented on several things. So Martin, if you can ping them, that would be great, so that they get a reply before we merge it. And essentially, I did a few when I went through the comments. I did a few things to move this a bit forward that are opinionated. So when there was a question if A or B, I just chose one and implemented it, meaning that you can still raise your thoughts and issues. I just want to make the specification ready to be merged because it's not the idle bot, but the the idle bot will close this issue every 2 weeks until unless there isn't commit in it. So I would really like to get this over the line. It depends a bit what we want to do here. Usually feedback comes once it's merged. Ideally, you would get feedback before we merge it, because then it would be a bit easier to change things. Yeah. That said, how are we want to move forward with this?
That was
Like,
kind of going to be my question, is what do you want the next action to be here?
well, I mean, I will get the thing is that I assume that I will get approval to merge from the semantic convention team quite quick if we want to. There's currently I believe, two build issues because they have to approve something and then everything should be fine.
Yeah, and you
My
need also a sponsor, right? As from Dynatrace, of one that is in this committee, right?
I think I have one.
Yeah,
Trask from Microsoft.
yeah.
So
Microsoft source on that. Yeah,
yeah, so we can get it in. The point is more at the moment I have still a header that we first need to approve before we merge this in. Now, when I get it green, I would like to get it in as quickly as possible. So the question is a bit, what's the approval process there? Like, we don't really have the stages of moving this from through the different levels of RFC, right?
yeah. Because it's like, just to frame this a bit, because this is actually a spec in the hotel work in the hotel space, and not under the GraphQL, um, not in the GraphQL repositories. So we don't have it under control read.
Yeah. And I would honestly prefer if people give a kind of a check mark. We can also just do a TSC vote. That's also fine. But it would be great if people would have an opinion about it, because otherwise it's out there and then it's just canon. So that's a bit the risk.
Yeah. Okay, TSC vote was going to be my intuition as well, which is just, I think the main value of that is just making sure that anyone on the TSC has the opportunity to review it and can give their stamp of approval. Um, And then like, very practically, anyone else who's been close to the OTel work should make sure they read through this. Because I know a lot of this, you did a lot of work to get this done. This is a decent amount of specification in here and some choices that you've made. Um, Maybe it would be helpful if you want to flag. I know this is in their repository, but if you want to open an issue in ours or something and just like flag, here are the handful of decisions that you had to make. Here's like the category you feel very confident are the right ones. Here's the category where you weren't totally sure, but you made what you thought was like a good judgment, and maybe here are the alternatives, just to kind of frame some discussion if there needs to be any remaining one. Um, but if you feel like you've made decisions and you feel super confident about all of them, then we're in great shape. And so if there's any ones that you just wanted to get input on, then rather than just like reading a very large markdown file, it might be easier if you were to like tease out like specifically the ones that you want feedback on or want a specific thumbs up. And we could do both at the same time. Like once you have that, then we can put it to a TSC vote and say, here's Pascal's opinionated take on what the OTel spec should be. Um, Either give it a thumbs up approve or give some feedback about anything we want to do a second look on.
Yeah, I can do that. We had in the beginning of the OTel working group a lot of contributions from the ecosystem that died down a bit over Christmas. After this,
Yeah.
it's always hard to get this started again. So at the moment, the last mile is mainly people which commented on the pull request. So I can create this summary, and then we can take a vote. There's definitely
I
a few
think
opinionated pieces in there. Yes.
Yeah, I think that'll be easiest for like selfishly for myself who have been less following carefully with OTel, and any other TSC folks who were not part of that working group, just to kind of review the final parts and get a sense of what parts of this are just sort of rote, you're just doing it the right OTel way, and which ones of these are like actually load bearing, where you would point to and say, oh, that's if that's a little bit weird, it's canon now. Like, that's the one we decided on. And so those would be the important ones to tease out. But I think we should do that in parallel with the TSC vote. Um, oh yeah, Benji's already flagging a couple small ones.
Yeah,
Service,
and this
food
is
service.
exactly the kind of feedback, right? The
Yeah,
terminology is good that Pascal and the working group took there
yeah.
and
This the
things like
spec
that.
does carefully use the word service instead of server, because sometimes it's running on your own computer right next to you, and there is no separate server. But it's a service running somewhere. Mark, I see your hands up. You got something to add?
Yeah, this is obviously quite a large change, and it is quite tough to review it all. I'm particularly interested in the subscription bits because that's kind of what we're implementing by hand. There's not a ton of great like service-to-service clients for this that do it out of the box, so we're kind of hand rolling it ourselves. So I'm looking at this through the lens of like an implementer from first principles. So um, what I was going to say is there like the same concept that we have in the GraphQL spec of dated versions of the OTel spec? Could we even put something else as like this is draft mode and then just basically merge it either as like a draft mode label or as a specified date label, and then like it's okay if we need to tweak something, if we notice something in a follow up PR.
Um, I don't think that they have previews. I haven't seen them, but I can ask. Otherwise, they have a Docker build, so we might be able to just push it
Yeah,
somewhere.
because
Um,
that would allow us to like actually merge this and get people using it with sort of like a lower like confidence threshold, I guess.
well, I
Like we
I
also
yeah.
we implemented the current version for hot chocolate and fusion.
Yeah,
So there's at least implementation for this, right?
yeah, but if it can be like
Not yeah. Okay.
as like
Right.
this is stage 2 or whatever,
Yeah.
because then like if I can, it's much easier to view like a built HTML version of this than the Markdown, frankly.
Yes, so we can build it, but I think if we merge it, it becomes there is a stage property, I can see if we can change it there, but I would say as soon as it's merged, it's probably gonna um, yeah, but we'll see. I can see what we can do. Maybe we can host it somewhere so it's easier to digest. One thing, sorry for taking longer than 5 minutes, but the point we've had this discussion briefly before about the GraphQL server versus GraphQL service. So the reasoning behind this is that there is already canon in the OTel or prior art in the OTel specifications. And there is a gRPC server client, and there is HTTP server client.
Okay.
So naturally, it falls back on probably GraphQL server and GraphQL client is gonna be the right choice here, right? But
Yeah, I think from you should favor OTel's naming conventions first when they have a strong opinion about how things should be named, and then fall back on GraphQL's opinion for naming things when OTel doesn't care as much or if there's ambiguity. So this seems like a case where OTel already has a strong convention for using the term server, in which case we should follow their convention and not be the one weird one just because GraphQL land prefers the term service. If it was arbitrary, if it was just like a word, then we should obviously use the one that we use internally. But yeah, you should follow OTel's
well,
convention.
I will double check this. I believe I followed the HTTP one. I will see if I will essentially I will compare us a bit with the gRPC one, and then we'll see.
I think that's smart.
I think the main thing there comes down to does it go over a network or not? And for the GraphQL, it doesn't have to. Like if you're using Gatsby, for example, or if you're just doing local resolution,
Well, that's
doing it
true
in a
for
job
all.
queue.
That's true for all OTel stuff, right? Because you could be doing something else and it doesn't. Um, but 99% of the time, if you're doing OTel stuff, you're probably doing OTel stuff over the network. 99.99% of the time? I don't know. OTel is primarily useful for when you're observability something across the network. Okay, but we trust your judgment here, Pascal. Yeah, framing up like here are the decisions that we made that are either yours or the result of that working group, and then teeing that up to be a TSC vote. That'll give everyone sort of like a last chance to review through everything. If we see anything like meaningful we want to dig through and fix, then we can do that. But to your point, like once we decide this looks good, then we want to get it back in your hands to get it merged.
Sounds good. I will include this in the write-up that I do, Benji. I will dig a bit and search for examples in HTTP and RPC and so on, and then we can make a case. That's the right choice. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Sweet. Okay, next up. Sibling errors should not be added after propagation.
Okay, hey folks. So I brought this to the working group last year, middle of last year, and essentially I found an issue in GraphQL.js where if you read the data and errors on a response, and then you read them again later, the errors array might get bigger after you've already received the response from the GraphQL execution engine, which was a bit weird. So this has now been resolved in GraphQL.js, and essentially this is a very small change to the spec that essentially puts this as a should, not a must, because technically we've always had the behavior where you have been able to do that, and I think other engines are probably going to fall foul of that. But essentially, if you are able to count, if a sibling blows up a selection set, then ideally nothing else from that selection set should be adding errors to your errors array. Like that bit is done now, we're finished, and we shouldn't keep propagating more stuff from the future backwards. So this is essentially what that does, and that has shipped as part of GraphQL JS v17 as well, I think.
Oh, I just realized I was muted. Does this shoot us away from valuable parallel errors? Like if you have a selection set with 5 fields in it and 2 of them fail nearly simultaneously, but for different reasons, because presumably you're doing those all in parallel, right? You're parallel resolving the values for those 5 fields, and 2 of them happen to fail as you're doing that, and then you like roll up the final result and send it back. You want to be able to say like these 2 error fields failed. This one failed for this error, that one failed for that error. Those are sibling positions, right?
Yes. So if they're both nullable positions, then it's fine. If one of them's nullable and it errors first, then it also you still get both. And if one of them, if they're both non-nullable, then they're both going to blow up that selection set. And the status
Okay.
currently is you are allowed to just stop at one error. All this is doing is saying you should stop at one error because it's really weird if you get an error that sort of comes later and gets added like retroactively into your errors object. But also, like in general, I think it is better, easier, more understandable for people if when a field is null, because an error happened, you find out why that error happened. And generally, it's going to be the first thing that went wrong is what caused that null to appear. The fact that more things went wrong afterwards is kind of irrelevant. They're like cascading failures. We don't guarantee their delivery already. So we're not really losing a guarantee here. We're just recommending that we get rid of them. But hopefully we move towards the new on error null once we get that merged and shipped, which then means that this problem is going to go away anyway, because if for any client using the newer behavior, there will be no error propagation, and thus this problem just completely goes away. So this is just like for anyone using traditional error propagation.
Sweet. Okay. Very convinced. I'm gonna mark this one as RFC2. I left one comment in there as I was reviewing through it, which hopefully is just a clarity thing, which I'll leave to your judgment. But after that, I think we're probably good async to approve it, unless anybody else on the call has feedback or suggestions. Cool. Happy to see this also added to the JS implementation already. Very cool. And it's already the default behavior. Okay, let's keep rolling. Empty selection sets.
Okay, cool. So during GraphQL Conf, or just after GraphQL Conf, we had the working group day, and a number of things we basically agreed on during that day. And a few of these ones that are coming up are basically the specification of a few of those. These are things that have been discussed many times over the years, but we never quite reached the like critical mass of like justifying why we need these changes. And now we really do have many more things that are leaning towards them. So the first one of these is allowing empty selection sets. Now, one of the main reasons for allowing this is for when a client can add fields that aren't real, virtual fields, local fields to a schema. So this might be where you have mocked fields. It might be where you have client-derived state and other such things. Those fields need to be removed before you send the request onto the server, or onto the service. Otherwise, it will not understand, it won't pass validation, and it will fail. But what happens when all of the fields within a particular object selection are those fields? Then you end up with no selection. So your option then is either to remove the fact that you asked for the field itself, or to put like dunder type name in the selection set. Neither of those are ideal. If you put dunder type name, you're delivering things that the user hasn't asked for, which is against the ethos of GraphQL. And if you remove the field, then you are not returning something that the user did ask for. Even just the fact of its existence, the fact that user 17 either exists or is null is a piece of data. So effectively, this is something that we do not have a good solution to that we can handle this. And this is a very, very simple solution to it, which is just allow empty selection sets.
Very in favor.
Cool. Yeah, me too. Yeah, Marcus,
Cool.
your comment in the chat. That's right. The solution today, if you want to check for existence, is to just query for the Dunder type name.
Yeah, we do it all the time, and it blows up the size of our responses, and also means people use type name, which we don't want to disallow.
Skip if true. Yeah, big brain. Very nice. You can skip the field.
Yeah, the skip if true is is a long used workaround to this problem, which
Which is
basically
very
shows that
funny because it
yeah.
basically means that the final selected selection set is in fact empty. We use the syntactical hack to get there, which makes it very obvious that this is a thing that we need.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead, Matt.
The fact that we do have empty selection sets in the response today, and people are always surprised when they first encounter that, is like a strong indication that this is actually less surprising to just explicitly allow it. So you will sometimes get it. And then people
Yeah.
can start to reason about how, oh, okay, it's empty. I didn't expect it to be empty. How could that be? Oh, I got an interface type that I never selected for.
Yep. Okay, I think the change itself is also very narrow, which is awesome. It just makes the grammar slightly more generous and then updates a little bit of prose. Um, then I guess the question is what is remaining here? I guess we have to have an implementation on the GraphQL JS side. Is that the only remaining piece?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. The spec edits were very simple. So yeah, it's just a case of implementing it in GraphQL JS and getting that shipped. So that should be straightforward. As long as we're all aligned, we can work on that.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna mark this one as RC2, even though the JS parts aren't quite there yet, just because I think from the spec side, this does actually look fully complete. And so it's just a matter of getting the change done. Since this is very straightforward, usually we're going to wait on RFC2 until we get GraphQL JS in place, because usually you learn things when you do that. But it's pretty clear exactly what we're going to learn by doing it, which is just making the grammar change. Um, is it worth having a breaking change conversation about this? Technically, this makes the grammar more general, so we've made it a superset of what it was before. It's not the only time we've done that, but anytime we do that for the actual query grammar or operations grammar, then we usually want to check to make sure that we're not accidentally breaking something somewhere.
So as far as I know, we won't break any existing documents, but new documents that use this won't necessarily be able to be passed by existing engines. Mark, you had your hand up for a while.
We can chat about it in the GitHub. It's fine. We need to talk about it.
Yeah, okay. That was the one case that I thought of as well, which is the case anytime that we additively add syntax, but um, this is technically additive in the sense that it's a strict superset grammar, so it should be safe from that point of
Yeah,
view.
I agree. And hopefully this will be another thing that gets tied into service capabilities to indicate that your server supports this. Service capabilities, by the way, I'm thinking of renaming to service properties, just FYI. But that's a different discussion. So I'll move on to the next one, which is empty object types. So this one comes out of a different motivation. One of the things that we've been talking about quite a lot recently is obviously how GraphQL fits with AI, and also how GraphQL fits with extremely large schemas and making them understandable, not just to AI, but also to humans. One of the things that's coming out of this is the idea of having like a sub schema where you extract a semantically relevant part of the schema and say, here's things that I think are relevant to this query that you have. And that's really useful. But you often, when you're doing this, want kind of stub types to say, like, here's some of the surrounding bits. Like, there's also book over here, and there's also article over here. They're not things you necessarily asked for, but they might be relevant. So being able to indicate that these kind of types exist without having to detail like what their fields are, helps to keep this like really nice and concise. In addition to this, we probably also want some syntax or a directive that sort of says this is a partial type. This isn't the full type. This is just like a summarized version of it that we've added for you. But anyway, the proposal is to allow these empty object types. This is also useful when you're just designing a schema in the first place, where you're like, there's going to be a user here. I don't know what a user is yet. I haven't quite decided that yet, but it's going to be a user and I'll get to it. Allowing people to design schemas like a bit at a time and still be able to execute them can be valuable. I think the main pushback against this over time has been like, is it marker interfaces, Lee?
A marker interface, as in like an interface type which defines no fields, and then therefore anything technically can implement it. Yeah, it's a little bit weird.
Yeah, so
Which
sorry, that'll be the next pull request to discuss.
Yeah, there's some value to those. Marker interfaces have their value, but they're a little strange.
Mm.
So, okay, the idea here is to give us the ability to define um partial schema.
Partial but valid schema. So schema subset. And again, with the empty selection sets, you can query this. Like, does this author exist? Empty selection set. So you can still get that even if you don't know what fields are present on it. So yeah, it's just it's if you're composing a schema, it helps you to build it in stages bit by bit. Or if you've got a large schema, it gives you a way of boiling it down and still indicating where your jumping off points are without actually detailing them. You could always like just add a few fields to it, but anytime you're doing that, you're obviously making this document bigger and you're hiding the like important parts of it that you actually want to convey.
Um, this may, okay, this is an interesting revisit to a grammar discussion we had back when we were first implementing extensions, which was we were talking about when you're defining a partial type, whether we wanted the curly braces there or not. Like, do you have an empty curly brace set or do you omit them? And we decided at the time if object types always have to have at least one field, then it doesn't make sense to have the curly braces empty because what that says is I am defining a complete type called book, which has no fields, which is not what you were doing. Instead, you were saying, I intend to define a type called book, and I have not yet defined what the fields are, which was like a very minor grammatical thing, but that was like the rationale we had by omitting the curly braces. And then we decided that would make it more obvious that this is an incomplete thing. You would look at it, you would say type book, and it doesn't say if it has 10 fields or one field or zero fields. It doesn't say it has fields at all. It says that those fields must come later via an extension. Um, and what we're saying now is a little bit different, which is actually, no, that is now a valid definition for the type called book, and it has no fields, in which case now grammatically it looks kind of backwards. Like I would actually expect it to have curly braces that have nothing in it to make it very clear that this is a complete type definition. It just like happens to not have anything inside of it. So I'm curious if that resonates or if you think we should do anything about that.
I'm somewhat indifferent on that. I see definitely what you're saying there. I'm not necessarily completely opposed to adding curly braces. Um, it does make it more explicit that it is like this is a type. This isn't like there's a thing coming later. Um, but equally, more characters is more tokens.
I mean, kind of. Um,
There's we will not allow for empty input objects, right?
There is currently no proposal to do so, and I'm not sure that there is a specific motivation to do so.
Well, there is in terms of you have so let's put it this way. What if there is a where clause, but you really couldn't care less about the arguments and they are all optional? So technically you wouldn't have you wouldn't need to return them. So it could be that you could even say that you have a required argument, but all of the fields are unnecessary. So you could leave them away. Um, that said, might be a bit of an edge case, definitely. But that said, because we can now define input object types the same way, and it would be different. So you can write extend type, you can write input and then leave the curly brackets away to say that there is an input object. And you could do now the same thing with object type, but actually in the case of the object type, it now means that it is valid, and in the input type, it doesn't. So it should be either we add the curly brackets, and then you have to add the curly brackets so that you have the same meaning, or we just say we also allow empty inputs and empty enums and empty whatevers. Because empty enums is also something like if for an LLM, if you return an enum value, who cares what the values or the possible values are? As long as you do not have to, for output only enums, no one really cares, right?
I think I'm in favor now of adding curly braces, so I propose we add curly braces.
yeah, I think like even just like you would expect to be able to do that if you were defining these, or if syntactically what you're doing is one of them is marked deprecated and it's finally time to delete it, and you delete it, and then all of a sudden it's grammatically wrong because you've got curly braces there with nothing in it. Like we should just change similarly the plus to a star. Um, Another thing that might be worth kind of poking at, I know we've talked about a little bit in the AI working groups, is whether the partial schemas need to be complete um, to the point of token efficiency. Like in your example here, where you've got author and it's got top books are book, there's actually like very little value being provided by saying, type book with the curly brace here. Um, all that's saying is like there exists a type and its name is book, which is pretty easy to infer already by the fact that you had a field there called top books book. The only thing that's being added new here by saying there's a type book and it's got an empty set is that book exists and there's no fields you're allowed to query on it, which might actually be the wrong thing you want to communicate to an LLM. Like the right thing you want to communicate to an LLM is exists a type called book and you just don't know what it is yet. Um, in which case, like that might be fine if it doesn't intend on querying that field in the first place, then it can just totally ignore the fact that there's a type there and it doesn't know what it is. So maybe we should like shift our thinking on the motivation here. Like if it's an AI generate, a sub schema generated for the purposes of an AI, maybe dangling indicators on types should be fine. Um, which does not, there's also like other motivation here, which is for schema management over time, deprecating, removing fields. You end up in the state, and we should represent it clearly.
So, like there is in this schema, if you think about a subschema and you say that this is semantically generated, what it would mean based on the score values is that top books made it into the selection of type of fields which are relevant enough to be there, but average rating is still more important than any field of book. So there is some semantic like information hidden in there. But I would argue you can probably just remove the field top books in that case, then, right?
Maybe like I can see a case where you say, we didn't quite get the job done in building a subset because we decided none of the fields in book are actually useful, and therefore take the top books field out because it wasn't worth adding. Or maybe you decide like that is a jumping off point should the LLM decide in a future turn that it does actually want to query that, or there was just enough of a weight ranking there to say top books might be interesting, but we're not so confident that we flushed out everything below it. So if it is interesting, like do a follow up and we'll add more schema for you. Um, that seems useful. And like in the cases that those are useful, it's probably more useful to communicate that there exists a type called book, which you can see because it's the return type, that it has not been defined yet. Like you don't know what it is. It's outside of the cleared fog, and therefore you need to ask about it, as opposed to what Benji's example lists here, which is there is a type called book and it just happens to have no fields, which is probably the wrong thing that the LLM should be reading.
We have this a lot. We've been slicing up our schemas like crazy. And the the dangling syntax is not great. Like it would be the LLMs when they are trying to produce schemas, almost always want to produce a complete schema. So they attempt to define things and then they throw in fields that like don't exist. And I think it would be a lot more clear if we had like a ref, just like we have extend type, if we had ref type or something like that. Uh, or the dangling type is also fine. Um, like it's probably the case that you want to be able to say, yes, this exists. Hey, there might even be directives on it that are important. There's like a type, essentially, there's a type uh, signature. There's a signature for this type. There's a signature for this enum, but we don't get into what is actually there. It's actually defined somewhere else or something like that. But yeah, it's a little bit weird.
Yeah, I'm loath to introduce new schema or new syntax until we prove to ourselves that that's like the only way or like the preferred way to solve that problem. Because I can think of other like tooling ways where the LLM attempts to run a query, and because we know that we've got some of the schema down, we validate the query before we run it. So rather than like waiting for it to run through the whole thing, thinking it might have hallucinated fields in it, we do a quick client-side validation before we run it. And if it fails that, then we go back to the LM and say like, you're not allowed to ask for this field. We don't know what it is. Um, which seems plausible. So anyway, like this, I just want to like kind of split this into two parts. One part of which is allowing empty object types. I'm in support. But another one is like just being really clear about our motivation. Like I think we should just be very careful about
I
what
think the schema
we're
evolution
repeating.
motivation is the most clear, actually,
Yeah,
because even if we're looking at deprecation and like producing schemas that, like, how do you produce an SDL where your type has every single field deprecated? And you should be able to deprecate every single field in a type.
exactly. That to me is the clearest motivation. That was the one that we had talked about before of if removing all deprecated things must always produce a valid schema, then today we can create constructions where that is not true. You can have a field with or an object with one field on it, as soon as you deprecate that field, you've broken that. And so like that is the thing that is feels very much like a bug that we should go fix.
I would argue then we should extend this though and say we allow empty everything because that holds for input objects and
That
enums.
that's kind of the next the next
Yeah,
topic.
Benji's just chopping these. Like, there's that one motivation is like
Yeah,
capturing like a handful of micro proposals. But yes, that's right.
benches just want to make all the square screen, and then on Monday allow empty objects, on Tuesday allow empty input.
I just wanted to highlight as a response to a few of the things here. I think there is value in telling the language model or even just the user, because again, I care a lot of the time more about humans than I do about language models. And that is like if you say something is like a weight, let's say, the weight might be an object, or it might be a float or a scalar or a custom scalar, and you then don't know whether it needs to have a selection set or not. So adding a definition of it down the bottom, even if it's just, scalar weight versus type weight, actually does give value. Also, I think LLMs in particular also need guidance a lot of the time. So if you're given here is a subset of the schema that's relevant to you, and the LLM goes, okay, here's a query for it, we do want to be able to validate them, which means it does need to be a valid schema. Otherwise, we can't validate against it, or at least not reliably. And also just like for humans as well, giving you something and saying, here's stuff that seems like kind of relevant, and here's things that you can explore later that you can then expand those selection sets. I personally find this to be irritating if I'm like trying to copy or mimic a schema, particularly if I'm doing it for like a training course or something like that. And I have to then every time I define a thing, I have to go and add fields to it. Like, oh, I have to add like an ID field because it needs to have something, but like I haven't even talked about what ID is yet. It's really like annoying. I want to be able to just define, say there will be a user, we'll figure out what that is later. So it's useful for that. It's also useful for mutation payloads. Generally, when you do a mutation, you want to have a payload on the result. You need to have that curly braces, that selection set in all of your operations. Even if you see your mutation as a void right now, it might not be a void forever. So you need that like expansion point. So just generally, this is a really useful thing. The language models are definitely like the thing that I think is going to get this over the line. But honestly, for me, it's not the most compelling reason for them. It's just a compelling reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing with flagging is that it is compelling, but it's probably the third most out of that list. And so we'll definitely nail the ones that are extremely compelling first. Just to make sure the tail's not wagging the dog.
But I think in general, this seems like a quite straightforward addition. And I have added to the description the curly braces, but I'm going to have to go through the
Yeah.
GraphQL syntax to allow for that because it already allows for it without curly braces. And it's just a validation rule. But with, I'll need to change the plus to an asterisk, which is fine. Okay, next up, I think we should allow interfaces with no fields and unions with no members.
Let's go. Same argument one assumes. It is worth
I think so.
questioning about whether these are all actually one proposal. Um, like, are these empty like schema definitions where objects, interfaces, and enums are all groupings of things? Like, if these all feel like carbon copies of the same thing, but like put in different spots, then it might be worth merging them into one proposal.
I
How
I
would an
also
empty enum work?
That's a good question.
for clients that's easy. You just always have the unknown future value. Um,
But how do you generate a response for it?
it is
Let's jump to that one.
yeah, that's a good one. Uh,
Don't have to because it's just one representation. Like the service still can have a representation of the enum. But in terms of subschemas, like you just don't care.
But a
Right?
subschema is just a schema, to my point of view. So if we're allowing empty enums, we're allowing empty enums in any schema, whether it's a subschema or not. So if you have a field and you declare that it is an enum and that enum has no values, how do you return a value for that field? There is nothing you can return. You can only return null, really, right?
Correct.
Yeah, but that's that leads to a whole whole array of other. There's we need let's introduce a new scalar called undefined.
Unknown future value.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
could have the server return an unknown future value.
that's a
So
problem.
I primarily split these up because I think they do all have their own issues, right? They all have, if we are aiming towards the path of like allowing all the different things to be empty, that's great. And I really want to support that. But
Yeah.
also, I'm worried if we put them all into one thing, that they're going to fall down when there is this question or there is that question. And I would rather work piecewise towards the end goal, and get there, or at least get
You're right.
80% there.
I I do want to on the union and interface thing. I do want to make the point right now. Uh, Unions and interfaces are a spectrum where your union, when it gets a field that every item in that union needs, it upgrades to an interface, which is not a breaking change. It's like kind of a breaking change. We label it as a breaking or dangerous change, but it's actually kind of fine. And even vice versa, once everything's deprecated and deleted, it's kind of fine. And so you can kind of treat unions and interfaces as interchangeable. And you could even imagine just a transform of like, I have no field, so I'm just declaring it a union. I have a field, therefore I'm doing like the inverse and modifying my schema. Whereas if we allow empties in both, then suddenly like unions are designed to do something different than interfaces. And I do think that that was probably Lee and Dan and Nick's intention that they are in fact different things.
Well, okay, to be fair, to Nick, Nick never wanted unions and he wanted empty interfaces from the beginning, which is a PHPism and a PHPism that I don't like. And so I was the one who suggested that we don't do that. Um, Mostly because if you say, this type is going to be one of these five possible things, it's very nice to be able to look at a union type that says it's either A or B or C or D or E, as opposed to having some empty interface that says like, I'm the, you know, whatever type, publication type, and then it has nothing in there and you don't know what it is and you have to go like grep the code base to find all the places that get added.
I would like, if we're going down this path, like, I would like a world in which when you have a union, you are only allowed to spread, like, there's a mode or something where you can, for unions, you can only spread items in said union. Because I think that spreading an interface inside of a union return is like pointing to bad schema design. But um but that being said, like uh yeah, I'm I'm happy to have empties in both. It's just like from a what you should do for your schema design and like what the intention is, like changes just a little bit in like how we portray that.
Yeah. Um, I can say now with the over a decade of hindsight that this may have been too much of like personal opinion, like pressed through uh, grammar restriction and schema restriction. Um, I still think it's the better practice to use a union type, or even better, one of, my new favorite way to represent unions. One of's way better across the board. Use one ofs. If you want to have like one of many things, we have the one of type. Some smart person in the call invented those things. Union types are your next best, and then like an empty interface is the last. The real reason why you should ever have an empty interface is actually because of this like deprecation thing where technically you have that interface, there's like three fields on it. You decide later that you don't actually want the interface, so you deprecate all the fields on it. Um, and then you've got this like zombie interface floating around that doesn't actually do anything useful. Um, I have an answer, by the way, to both the union and enum case of like what happens when you query a field and it's a union type that has no members, or what happens when you query a field that's an enum type that has no options. You throw an error. So if it's non-nullable, because right, like the only valid return value for a field which is not nullable and is an enum, um, and that enum has no members in it, there is no valid return value. It's the never type, and so the only thing you can do to return a value to the never type is to throw an error, or presumably that enum expands in the future and then it gets a value. So you should essentially expect if you query it, either you're going to get something that you have no idea what it is, or it's going to throw an error. It's going to be one of those two things, which seems totally fine. That if you end up deprecating the entirety of the surface area of an enum, then probably what you're going to do is throw an error if someone tries to query that field.
That
Yeah,
does
I
lead
do agree
to
with that.
I I agree. However, it does lead to an interesting state where, as a product developer, if my server person has given me an enum that is in the never state, uh, and I'm building my product and I build it and I'm only ever testing the error case.
And in practice, like the way you'll actually arrive there is you'll have an enum state, or an enum. The enum will have some set of members, all of which are deprecated, which basically says like this whole field, basically all the fields probably should have also been marked deprecated, but like in order to avoid this like chaos where you have to like follow the chain, if by some way a field is not deprecated, it's in the non-deprecated schema, it accesses an enum, all of the members of that enum are deprecated, then your non-deprecated schema gets back an empty enum, which means the value is going to be something you don't know, and the thing you don't know is a deprecated value. Like a deprecated
Yeah.
value will come back and it'll basically say like we intend to stop shipping this value at some point. And the
I
client developer should just say like,
yeah.
I'm going to get a useless opaque value from this.
I think from that direction, that's correct. From the like deprecating into this, I think from the other direction of like, oh, great, this lets me not, if as a schema design, before we ship this product, I will start adding some enums, but just to get started, like I'm making this non-nullable field return an empty enum. Like in that world now you end up with product that has like never exercised the non-error state. However, like you already get that with nullable fields where like server always returns null and
Yeah.
suddenly starts returning real values and that starts breaking product. And so like, yeah, it's the library design. Yeah. So I'm just putting this out like this extends that class of like design over time changing can cause weirdness in product.
See Martin sneaking in the chat with fixing all of our problems with one error being null. Yep. Yep, that's
Solution to
right.
every problem.
This is like the thing that merges like Dan Schaefer's original argument of why everything should be default nullable. It's like at some point you're gonna have to get rid of it from your schema or something in the back end, it's gonna go away, and the only valid value you could ever return at that point is null. It's like Dan remains true. That is correct. However, if you instead say if you throw an error, we'll just replace it with null in the response, then you get the exact same behavior with a cleaner schema. So We learn things. Um,
One, like, I'm not sure that it changes the outcome of this discussion in any meaningful way, but I just realized there's one interesting side effect of this, that this will change federation composition rules. Because suddenly it's fine that you have two completely different enums on services which do not intersect any values, but have it as in and outputs. So with federation, you can actually, in composite schema and graphical federation, you can actually end up in the state where you have two services which are completely valid in themselves, but then you have a gateway where the intersection of an enum is none. And yeah, so you would actually run into the issue that you would have to return something in this case.
Why for composite schemas is it the gateway is doing the intersection instead of the union of the enums?
Because of inputs and outputs. So there's actually a
Oh.
federation. In federation, it's a long discussion. Like Apollo Federation does it in a very fancy way. If you only do inputs, then it's union. If you only do inputs, then it's intersect. Yeah, you got it. Input outputs. So yeah, but null is a bit. It's not null, is it? Like, what happens if the enum is not null?
I think at that point like it's fine. Like from a schema perspective, this is fine, but it's a composite it's an error in the service, just like we're saying it's an error in the service.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's just ugly. That's the runtime. I mean, we have the
yeah.
validation rules to prevent us from getting into this state anyway. On the other hand, like you can technically define it, and then it's a runtime error. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. Benji, to give us the overall next step for this category of RFCs, we're going to put all of them into RFC1 because I think we all agree that this is like a domain of problem that needs to be solved. In particular, this like baseline that a schema with all deprecated elements removed must itself be valid. I think this one definitively must be true, and currently we can point to lots of reasons why it's not true. We need to solve that. It doesn't necessarily mean that solving it is super straightforward. There's a lot of kind of open questions about what happens in all those various corner cases that we have to have clear answers to, and um, schema composition being one of the domains in which that might get tricky. So carry on with those, or if there's any extra input you need, let us know.
Okay, sounds good. I just wanted to also a conversation that came up ages ago was like, what if you have a mutation only schema? And again, that's another use case for those empty object types. Like if you only want to be able to do mutations, you still need to be able to support introspection. Anywho, I'm gonna skip over these next few a little bit. So I'm just going to talk about them at a very high level. So a schema, if you remove any deprecated elements from a schema, that schema should remain valid. And I think that that's what our validation rule for this should be. We've talked about deprecating object types and stuff like that in the past. And there's been complexity around that in terms of like, okay, but if you deprecate the object type, then what if it's like, do you need to deprecate the fields that use it? And we were trying to come up with all the different validation rules throughout the entire type system that like tried to cover all of these edge cases. And that kind of put the whole like concept of deprecating object types on hold. And I think we can just do away with all of that with this very simple rule, which is if you remove everything from your schema that has been deprecated, the resulting subschema, if you want to call it that, should itself be valid. That's all that proposal is, essentially, and I'm seeing a lot of nods, so I think there's general support for that. The change as it stands in the spec right now is actually really straightforward because we actually really only have like one place where we require this particularly. So we just remove that, add it in another place instead, and we're basically done. This also ties into, as you probably know, I'm not a big fan of the way that we have like fields include deprecated, enum values include deprecated throughout introspection. Ideally, what I want is you to either request the full schema or the non-deprecated version of the schema, and those are your two things, and you shouldn't think about anything else. I spent a couple of hours like poking around at this, trying to make it work in the existing system, and it is a nightmare, specifically because we have include deprecated defaulting to false. If we had it defaulting to true, everything would be fine because you would just ask for the full schema, or you'd ask for the everything removed from it schema. And then when it says include deprecated, there is nothing deprecated in the undeprecated schema, so everything would be fine. Unfortunately, because we defaulted it to false, we don't have that. You have to, even if you say, give me the full schema, you're already still dropping deprecated things from it because that's what those field arguments say. So I did some experimentation around that. I would like to propose that we add like an argument to dunder schema or possibly a different entry point. I don't really mind which of those, but it did involve essentially redefining how the include deprecated arguments work in introspection and basically making them what I can't think of the right word to use for this, but contextually aware. So it knows what entry point you use. Did you ask for the full schema? Did you ask for the undeprecated schema? Or did you just ask for schema like the traditional one? And then we would apply defaults based on that. We can do this because, of course, it's always been it's been non-nullable for a little while since I added those bangs to the spec. And it had a default. So they are technically optional. So making that behavior kind of dynamic based on what you feed in at the root level, and then basically strongly deprecating the use of those arguments. I would love to do this in general because I think it like just massively simplifies what you're asking for in introspection. Do you want the full schema? Do you want the smaller schema that doesn't have anything deprecated in it? Top level thing, done. And then we just have some legacy support chores for the rest of it, which is annoying because honestly, it made this a lot larger than it needed to be if we'd have just had a different Boolean. So that's that one. Please have a look, give your opinions on the pull request. Finally, and most importantly, the GraphQL over HTTP spec is essentially approved. We've got that final pull request number 404. That is essentially waiting for a couple more check marks. But that's the final editorial of it. It goes through and it does the simplification that was proposed by Martin and Michael to essentially remove previously we had these two different media types, like the legacy one and the one we want people to use that has status codes. This is actually a very big shift. I want to make this very clear. This is a big shift from what we were previously proposing for this spec. So previously we wanted to support everything that had happened up until now, whilst also saying what you should do in the future and that you should use status codes. There's still a lot of words out there in the ecosystem, in the wider ecosystem, saying, "Oh, GraphQL doesn't respect HTTP, etc." That needn't be the case. What this does is makes that a lot stricter. It still essentially supports existing clients on the happy path, i.e., where even partial success, so where the request is successful or partially successful, you will still get 2xx status codes, and it will then allow you to use application JSON. The only difference is that for invalid requests, so like where a request isn't the right shape or where the document itself doesn't validate, those will now use the new status codes. and they will use the new content type application slash GraphQL response plus JSON, which I don't think will break any applications because any applications that are deployed shouldn't be having requests that are invalid, right? Those would already be erroring anyway. So essentially, we might change what that error is, but broadly, they should still work. And that's been essentially achieved through one particular paragraph in this pull request. I can't find it right now. But yeah, it's a big shift. But what it does do is it massively simplifies the spec. As you can see, it's deleted like almost 200 lines of code from the spec or lines of text. So that does help. And it also means that we can concretely say that 200 OK is well in the past of GraphQL. So yeah, if you have opinions on that, please put them on that pull request. We are probably, or file an issue would also be fine. We're probably going to merge that pull request essentially as soon as Michael puts his +1 on it, unless anyone has hesitations. Pascal.
I have a general question about the release of the specification. I'm so now half truths, or I'm just it's not up to my knowledge, but what's the state of the query stuff, the query HTTP method? Because that would be really nice to have, because that would solve a lot of problems. Now, if this is now not merged or will not be released until we release the specification, then we should go without it. But if I'm not sure about the state of it, but I've heard that it's on its way or it has arrived, because that could change massively how we do GraphQL, right?
Agree. So the query method in HTTP has just very recently been like essentially approved by is it the IETF? I can't remember. But essentially it's been approved there. We have not got any text in this spec for it. And I would recommend that we don't hold up the release of this spec for it. That said, I think 1.1 of this spec will be essentially, here's the query verb. This solves all of your get problems. We recommend you don't use get anymore and use query. Obviously, we need to make sure that there is sufficient support across all of the ecosystems for query before we
Well,
encourage it too heavily.
Okay, so then I would say we should probably get this in. We should probably release this as V1, because it could very well be that the query verb is V2 and not V1.1 of the spec.
Yep.
Because I would argue, and this is a discussion that we'll have in the GraphQL over HTTP specification, that it's not we replace get, it's every query should be query and every mutation can be something else. But that's a discussion for a different spec version. So 20, yeah, that makes all sense. That makes sense. So then get it in, get it out, the GraphQL over HTTP. Then we have covered everything until now, and then we have a few years to switch over to the query one. But cool.
Yeah,
Really stoked this goes in now.
agree with that. And yeah, I like to tie this into the September release of the main spec. Go on.
Yeah, okay, you just said the thing I wanted to say. So I want to get these tied together because we have this whole section at the top of the spec that says we're intentionally agnostic about transport. I would love to update that to say we're not, you can use this with any transport. However, the vast majority use JSON over HTTP, and we have a spec definition for best practices for using GraphQL over HTTP, and then hard link over to that spec document. That way, someone reading the first one very quickly can find the other one, because it's probably the main way in which this ends up working well, is if you can kind of quickly hop between them. We should do the same backprop one as well, right? The HTTP GraphQL over HTTP should have a backlink that links to the main GraphQL spec. I love the shorter version. This is great. I filed one. I just opened an issue because we've got sort of PRs on PRs, and I didn't have a great spot to put it, but I'll drop it in. Oh my gosh, what did I just do?
Where's the repository? Okay.
There you go. Just a small editorial thing. I was just gonna say we should use the word should instead of recommended in a bunch of places. There's places where we just interchange the two, and they are synonymous, so we should just pick one. But that was just like a small editorial thing. This is awesome.
Is there a particularly strong reason for that? Like, so
Oh,
the
just
RFC does
simplification of
allow for.
prose. Yeah,
Okay.
there you can use either because the RFC defines both of the terms. Um, it's more of a just like textual simplification. Just like you could say the word shall instead of should, and it's like some of those are just like they give you a handful of words to use so that if you need to squeeze a word in a particular sentence to make the term you like if it's an adjective, then you got to use the right adjective. But I think there's a few ways we can just like reword things a little bit. Specifically, let's see, what part was I looking at? Oh, the response codes. So there's response codes where, if a mutation is attempted via the get term, status code, 405 must be used. And then we switch from this like blank be used to is recommended. And I think we should just say like should be used. And then that way we have like the same like grammatical form for every single one of these bullets. And it's just
They
either
have
stick the word must or the word should. That was my one thought.
I agree. They have the same normative strength, right? But
Yep.
in English, they mean ever so slightly different, and I think the recommended is more correct there. So should is basically saying this is what you should do, right? But recommended is more like this is what we would recommend, but if you know better, you should use your one. And that is actually what the intent is here. Like if something has gone wrong of this particular shape, then if you don't know what to do, this is the one that you should use. But if you do know what to do because it's something specific, then by all means use your one. So according to the RFC, they mean the same thing, but
Yeah.
I did deliberately choose the word recommended rather than should here.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I think we should be slightly more forceful. I mean, they're normatively the same. And ideally, if you're reading a spec, you should walk away with like stronger recommendations. Um,
We could just put must.
well, if there's like scenarios in which deviating from that could have reasonable reasons for doing so, then you don't want to use must. But so I do think recommended slash should is the right level of normativeness. Anyway, it was just a suggestion of like narrowing down to the canonical must and should, must, should, may, instead of diving into the alternative words to avoid
Okay.
misinterpretation.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sweet. We managed to nail the entire agenda and only go 4 minutes over, and we started well past 4 minutes into the time. So incredible work getting through a very long agenda, basically exactly on time. Very fantastic. A lot of energy and progress along a lot of things. Huge thanks, Pascal, Martine, Benji, and everybody else for jumping in. This has been awesome. Thanks, y'all.
Cool. If you need
That's
things
right,
landed
everyone.
in the spec before it cuts, let's get it done in that mid-meeting in 2 weeks' time. And also like just ping each other on Discord and on the issues.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.